these are confidence boosters for all of us, and then we can teach them on. I'm absolutely of the belief that, as we've said, this is driving lessons. This is about muscle. And if your children have any of the issues that Aisha described, I certainly have seen those in my own children, then teaching them these little tips and tricks and getting them to practice them will really, really help. And it's not about big steps suddenly, it's about baby steps. Anything worth having takes little and often practice. There's a word in Hebrew that I think sums up what confidence isn't, and we all know what it feels like, and we probably all experience this thing daily at the moment. In Hebrew, there is a word called pashad, and if anybody speaks Hebrew, forgive me because I'm probably going to mangle it. It means in biblical Hebrew, it's an old word, I think, the fear that closes you down. Like I should describe the feeling of being afraid in front of the class. Oh my gosh, if I had $1 for every client who comes to me saying I had to speak up in the class when I was 8 and it went wrong and I've been terrified of public speaking ever since. These things, they can scar us. And when we feel those kinds of fear, we close down. It makes us small. It makes us want to hide. But there is another kind of fear that I think is an inspiring kind of fear. It's the fear that makes you bigger. I watched my daughter, who's about to leave school and go to secondary school next week, step out on stage in a big hall in London the other day. She stepped out on this huge stage in front of about 150 people. And she could have gone into pashad and got shaky and been small, but she opened up her body and she stepped up and she owned it. And when we hit Yirah, and when we help our children to hit Yirah, we grow, we change. And what I want to give you are some really straightforward, practical mind and body tools to help your children and yourselves find Yirah rather than pashad, because Yirah allows us to grow. Now, my youngest daughter, who is 6, yesterday was feeling very, very sad about life, and she was in a real state, and we started to talk about emotion and how we could send emotions up into the sky or how we could push them away from us. And I started to think about framing as a tool and how framing is so powerful, because so often when something overwhelms us, it feels like it's kind of going to attack us from above. It feels big, it feels scary. Now, my world is actors. I used to train actors. And when you ask an actor what happens when something goes wrong on stage, it's funny, we don't like actors often in our culture because they pretend, but they're also incredibly good at being resilient. And they're also incredibly good at being flexible. And what actors will tell you about when something goes wrong on stage, you imagine that you are flying above the scene, looking down on it from a distance, and then you make a decision as to what to do next. And I think teaching ourselves how to reframe things in the moment is incredibly powerful. So right now, if you think about something that's stressing you out, and notice how when it's stressful, it feels big and it feels close and it feels almost unbearable, if you can push it away from you in your mind's eye, or if you can imagine that you're looking down on it from a satellite, from NASA, the space station, up, a mile above our heads, and look down, then suddenly the problem feels smaller. And I think just changing the frame. My daughter and I last night were talking about a pond. She was imagining that each emotion was a pond. And I got her to tell me what fish was in the pond, because she came up with this metaphor. And I could see it was distancing her from the problem. And she said, oh, it's a sad fish. And so I said, well, is there another fish? She said, yeah, there's a happy fish. And it was so interesting watching her frame her own emotions and how that gave her distance. Now, I wanted to talk to her about Rumi's house. Every emotion is a guest. You have to welcome them all in. But she didn't want to go with that frame. She wanted the fish pond. And it was actually really nice to watch her create her own frame to step back from her emotions and to own them. So really play with this idea of framing. And the simplest frame of all is, like actors, to go up and look down on the situation from space.